The day my mother-in-law took my framed pharmacist license off the wall and smashed it against the kitchen floor. I didn't make a sound. I just stood there watching the glass fan out across the tile. That certificate I'd worked 7 years of night shifts and student loan payments to earn, and felt something inside me go very, very still. "You think a piece of paper makes you special?" she said. "You're nothing in this house." My husband stood in the doorway with his coffee mug. He looked at the glass, looked at me, and took a sip. My sister-in-law laughed from the couch. "She's so dramatic," she called out, not even looking up from her phone. None of them knew what that moment cost me, and none of them knew that in that exact second, I stopped trying to save the family I'd spent 19 years building. My name is Delia. I'm 41 years old, and I've been a registered pharmacist for 14 years. I grew up in a group home in Columbus, Ohio. No parents, no relatives, just a series of caseworkers who smelled like hand sanitizer and always seemed to be running late. When I was 22, I met my husband at a fundraiser for the hospital, where I'd just started working. He was charming in the way people are when they want something. I was lonely in the way people are when they've never had anything. I thought I had finally found my family. I thought wrong. I want to be honest about something, because people always ask the same question, and I never had a satisfying answer until recently. Why did I stay so long? The truth is that when you've never had a home, you'll endure almost anything not to lose the one you've built. Every time I thought about leaving, a voice in my head said, "Where would you even go?" I had no one. My mother-in-law had held my hand at our first meeting and told me I was like the daughter she'd always wanted. I held on to that memory for 17 years past when it stopped being true. That's not weakness. That's what it looks like when someone confuses cruelty for belonging. For 19 years, I worked double shifts to pay off my husband's failed construction business, a Chapter 7 bankruptcy that wiped him out, but somehow left me standing, because I was the one with credit, with savings, with a career. When we refinanced the mortgage to settle his creditors, the bank required the deed to be in my name alone. He never mentioned that again. I paid it off in 11 years on a pharmacist's salary. I managed every single one of my mother-in-law's 14 daily medications. I drove her to her cardiologist, her orthopedist, her primary care doctor. I sat in waiting rooms with a yellow legal pad, because neither my husband nor my sister-in-law could be bothered to learn the difference between a beta blocker and a blood thinner. I paid the portion of her care costs that her Medicare didn't cover, quietly, because I didn't want to cause a scene. I told myself it was what family did. They called me lazy when I slept in on my day off after a 12-hour overnight shift. They called me ungrateful when I suggested my mother-in-law might benefit from seeing someone about her mood. They helped themselves to my paycheck and my time and my patience. And they did it with such confidence that I sometimes wondered if I was the problem. The morning after the license, my mother-in-law called Riverside Pharmacy, where I'd worked for 12 years, and told the manager I had been stealing controlled substances. She gave my name, my employee ID, my license number. She said she'd seen me pocket pills. By noon, I was on administrative leave pending a state board investigation. I came home to find them eating lunch. My sister-in-law was using the good china. My mother-in-law was watching her television program. My husband glanced up from his phone. "Heard you got a little problem at work," he said. My sister-in-law smiled into her soup. I set my purse on the counter. I took one breath, and then, in a voice I barely recognized as my own, I said, "I'll figure it out." I went upstairs and stood in the bathroom for a long time. I thought about 19 years. I thought about the woman in the mirror, the circles under her eyes, the tight set of her jaw. I thought about the first winter I'd lived in a group home 8 years old, learning not to cry because crying didn't change anything. That woman had survived a lot of things. She had survived this family's contempt for nearly 2 decades. She could survive 3 more days. I turned off the light, I went to bed, and in the morning I started the plan I'd been quietly building for 6 months. The next day, I made breakfast. Scrambled eggs, wheat toast, the decaf coffee my mother-in-law required for her blood pressure. I set everything on the table like always. When my husband came downstairs, he nodded without looking at me, the same way you'd acknowledge a piece of furniture. "I'm going to run some errands," I said. "Don't forget my dry cleaning," my sister-in-law called from upstairs. "Of course," I said and walked out the front door. My first stop was my attorney's office downtown. I'd hired her 6 months earlier, not because I'd already decided to leave, but because something in me had known the way you know a storm is coming before the sky changes color. We'd been meeting every few weeks since then. The paperwork was already drafted. The evidence was already organized. "We're ready when you are," she said. "I'm ready," I said. My second stop was my bank, where I transferred my salary direct deposit and my savings to the separate account I'd opened 4 months earlier, in my name only, at a different institution. I left $40 in the joint account, enough to keep it technically open. My third stop was the county recorder's office, where I requested certified copies of the deed. My fourth stop was the State Board of Pharmacy. I'd filed my formal response to my mother-in-law's complaint 3 days earlier, with 14 years of clean performance reviews, 0 disciplinary history, and a signed statement from my pharmacy manager, confirming that the controlled substance inventory had been audited and not a single discrepancy existed. The investigator told me, with the careful neutrality of someone who'd seen this before, that the complaint appeared to be without basis and would likely be closed within the week. I also formally resigned from Riverside that afternoon, gave proper notice, and made sure every cent of my accrued PTO was transferred to my new account. I drove back to the house at 4:30. On the kitchen table, I left a single envelope. Inside was a copy of the divorce petition, already filed with the court. Next to it, I left 3 days' worth of meals, labeled containers in the refrigerator, detailed instructions for the medications pinned to the corkboard, the name and number of my mother-in-law's primary care physician written clearly at the top. Then I picked up the one bag I'd packed the previous week, a carry-on, deliberate. I left every coat on its hook, every dress in the closet, every photograph on the wall. I left the furniture and the dishes and 19 years of accumulated life. I took only what mattered: my passport, my laptop, my original pharmacy license, retrieved from the broken frame 2 nights earlier, the glass swept up and disposed of. A folder of documents I'd been building for 8 years, starting with a registration certificate from the Australian Health Practitioner Regulation Agency. I walked out. They didn't notice until morning. My attorney told me later that my husband called the house line 11 times before noon. My sister-in-law went to check my room and reported back that everything looked normal. My clothes still in the closet, my shoes on the rack. She told him I'd be back by dinner. He believed her. What none of them thought to check was the small fireproof lockbox that had lived in the back of the linen closet for 8 years. Because the lockbox was gone, and in it had been the only things in that house that were irreplaceable. My husband read the divorce papers and laughed. "She's bluffing," he told my sister-in-law. His mother looked in the refrigerator, saw the labeled containers, and said, "See, she left food. She's scared. She'll be back." They ate my meals and went to bed. 2 days later, they received a call from the real estate firm. I'd listed the house that Tuesday. 4 offers by Thursday. The agent called to schedule an interior showing. My husband used words I won't repeat and told her she had no right to set foot on his property. She informed him, calmly, that the property belonged to me, that the deed had been in my name for 11 years, that the mortgage was paid in full, and that she already held a key per the owner's instructions. He called me 56 times over the next 2 days, every call connected to a number that no longer existed. I know the precise moment he stopped believing I was coming back, because my attorney received a copy of his court filing, an emergency injunction to halt the home sale, with an attached declaration claiming I had stolen marital assets and was mentally unstable. What he didn't know was that I had been keeping records for 7 years. Every out-of-pocket expense for my mother-in-law's care, the copays, the specialized medications her Medicare plan didn't cover, the mobility equipment, the home health aide who came 3 mornings a week during my overnight shifts. I had every receipt, reviewed by a CPA, notarized and time-stamped. The total was $28,400. When my husband filed his false report with the bank, claiming I'd embezzled funds from a family account his mother depended on, my attorney walked into that bank the following morning with a binder 3 inches thick. The account freeze was lifted by 10 a.m. The police, meanwhile, had received his missing persons report. Mentally unstable wife, fled with family savings, possible self-harm risk. He'd actually used those words about me while I was sitting in a hotel room, eating a turkey sandwich, paying my bills online. What he didn't know was that my attorney had gone to the police first, the day before, with the pharmacy board's preliminary findings, the notarized expense records, and the documentation from an urgent care visit I'd made 6 weeks earlier. That visit had been brief. I'd gone in after my mother-in-law grabbed my arm during an argument and left bruises that lasted 10 days. I hadn't filed a report at the time. I'd just asked the nurse practitioner to document what she observed. The document had been in the lockbox. Filing a false police report in this state is a Class A misdemeanor. Filing one maliciously, with fabricated supporting claims, to obstruct an active civil proceeding. Prosecutors tend to view that more seriously. My husband was asked to come in for questioning. Instead, he went to the pharmacy. He stood at the Riverside counter and told whoever would listen that his wife was a drug thief who had been stealing for years, and demanded they fire her immediately. He was loud enough that 3 customers left the line. The pharmacy manager, who had worked with me for 11 years, who had written 2 of my promotion letters, who had once sent me a fruit basket when I had my appendix out, walked him personally to the door. Miss Hargrove resigned 4 days ago with proper notice, she said. The state board closed the complaint against her this morning. I'd strongly recommend you stop talking and call an attorney. She closed the door. He went home to find a letter from his employer. 2 officers had visited his office to ask about the police report. His boss, who valued things like reputation and institutional calm, had placed him on indefinite administrative leave, pending a disciplinary review. The electricity in the house was disconnected the following morning. It had been in my name. So was the water. I had submitted termination requests the same day I left. My sister-in-law called from a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail and deleted it without listening. I know what happened in that house, because some of it became part of the legal record, and because my attorney's paralegal had a talent for tracking public filings. What I know is this: in 4 days, they went from a fully staffed, fully functioning household to 3 adults who couldn't locate an insurance card or identify a single medication by name. My sister-in-law called 4 friends to ask for a place to stay. None of them said yes. Word travels. She ended up in a motel, running down a debit card with $60 on it. My mother-in-law, who had been managing on the pre-labeled medication organizer I'd filled before I left, ran out on the 6th day. Neither my husband nor my sister-in-law knew how to refill a prescription. They didn't know the name of her pharmacy. They didn't know whether her blood pressure medication required prior authorization. They didn't know that it did, and that I had been fighting that authorization battle with her insurance company every year for 4 years. She was taken to the hospital by ambulance on a Wednesday evening. In the emergency room waiting area, my husband discovered, for the first time, that the luxury SUV he drove on weekends had been financed entirely in my name. He discovered this because the repo notice arrived via certified mail, forwarded from the house to the attorney's office that was now managing correspondence. I had stopped making payments when I left. The lender moved quickly. He also found, in the glove compartment when he went to clean it out before they took it, a small spiral notebook I'd left there deliberately. In it was a list, nothing dramatic, just a record, of every loan payment I'd made on his behalf since his bankruptcy. The total, with interest, was just over $31,000. I'd written the total in red at the bottom of the last page. I don't know exactly what he said or did after that. I do know that 2 officers showed up at his office the following morning to serve him a formal notice, and that by the time he returned home that afternoon, my sister-in-law had packed her remaining things and left without a note. I was in a hotel room that evening when my phone buzzed with a flagged transaction alert. My attorney called 30 seconds later. Your husband filed a civil fraud claim, she said. A judge granted a temporary freeze on your secondary account pending review. It may affect the wire transfer for your opera renewal fees. I sat on the edge of the bed and felt the floor drop out from under me. How long? I asked. 24 hours if we move fast. But Delia, she paused, they just made the worst mistake they could have made. She explained what I already knew, but hearing her say it out loud steadied something inside me. The civil fraud claim required him to provide evidence of embezzlement. We had 7 years of notarized records proving the opposite. The moment we presented those records to the court, his filing would be ruled frivolous. The temporary freeze would be lifted, and filing a fraudulent civil claim with fabricated supporting documents, on top of the existing false police report, would add to what was already accumulating against him. The wire transfer, I said. Will it go through in time? I'll be at the courthouse when they open, she said. I promise you, it will go through. I set the phone down. Outside the hotel window, it was raining. I looked at the folder on the bed beside me. The opera certificate. The offer letter from Royal Melbourne Hospital. The old scholarship acceptance I'd printed and kept because it was proof that once, before I was anyone's wife, I'd been wanted somewhere. I had registered with Opera 8 years ago. Not as part of any plan to leave. I want to be clear about that. I'd seen a job posting for a senior clinical pharmacist position in Melbourne and thought, with the particular wistfulness of someone who'd given up a lot of things. What if? I'd done the registration online one afternoon while my husband was out watching football. I'd passed the equivalency assessment, submitted my credentials, paid the fees. They'd issued me a valid registration number. That evening, my mother-in-law had looked at me across the dinner table and said, "You look exhausted," in the tone she used to mean you're a disappointment. I'd closed the APRA email, filed it in a folder labeled miscellaneous, and tried to forget it existed. I had not forgotten it. By 8 the following morning, my attorney was at the courthouse. By 10, the freeze was lifted. By 11:15, the wire transfer cleared and my registration renewal was confirmed. The offer from Royal Melbourne was still standing. They'd been patient because my credentials were exactly what their clinical team needed. My flight departed from Newark at 6:15 the following morning. My husband arrived at JFK at 8 a.m., armed with flight information his contact had obtained through channels I won't speculate about. He went to the International Departures Terminal for the flight I had booked, carefully, deliberately, under my name to Sydney. He waited for 2 hours. He went to the counter and demanded confirmation of my check-in status. He caused enough of a disruption that security asked him to step back. He told them he was a husband trying to find his wife. They told him that wasn't something they could help with. My attorney's associate had been there since 7:30. She waited until he'd fully exhausted himself before she approached. "She's not on this flight," she said. He told her she was lying. "She departed last night," she said. "Different flight, different airport." She told me later that his legs gave out, that he sat down on the terminal floor, right there between the ticket counters, with travelers stepping around him like he was a piece of lost luggage. "Where is she?" he said. "Somewhere she's wanted," she said. Before she left, she told him the one thing my attorney had asked her to deliver in person, that I had held an Australian pharmacist registration for 8 years, that I had accepted a senior clinical position at one of the country's leading hospitals, and that on the same week I met him, I had received a competitive scholarship to complete an international clinical fellowship in Sydney, and I had turned it down, at 22 years old, because I thought I had found my family. She said he didn't speak for a long time after that. The eviction notice was served the following afternoon. The home sale had gone to closing, cash offer, fast timeline, new owners who wanted possession promptly. My husband and his mother were legally required to vacate within 30 days. The locks had already been changed. My mother-in-law was discharged from the hospital that same week. The attending physician provided a detailed care summary, 14 medications, dosing schedules, dietary restrictions, specialist contact information. My husband stood at the discharge window looking at the paperwork, the way you look at a document in a language you've never studied. The discharge nurse asked him who her primary care physician was. He said he didn't know. She said that was fine, they'd look it up. He said my wife always handled that. The nurse said quietly, "I know." Somewhere in the official documentation of my mother-in-law's hospital stay is a clinical note that reads, "Family member state's wife always handled patient's care coordination and medication management. Family requires significant education and resources for home management. 19 years, 14 medications." One line in a nursing note. The divorce was finalized on a Thursday. Melbourne time, it was my lunch break. The hospital cafeteria, pale winter sun through the windows, food I hadn't made for anyone else. My phone buzzed with an email. Final decree attached. I read it. I set the phone face down on the table. The radiologist sitting next to me, a woman I'd met during my first week, who made good coffee and had an extremely dry sense of humor, glanced over. "Everything okay?" I thought about 19 years. I thought about a group home in Columbus and a 22-year-old who had confused cruelty for belonging. I thought about a framed certificate smashing against kitchen tile, and the extraordinary stillness that had followed, and all the long, careful months between that moment and this one. "Yes," I said. "Actually, yes." That evening, my department had a small birthday gathering. I hadn't mentioned it, but someone had checked my personnel file and ordered a cake. My colleagues crowded into the break room and sang badly, and with great enthusiasm, and someone handed me a slice with far too much frosting, and I sat in the fluorescent light surrounded by people who had taken the time to find out when my birthday was, and felt something settle in my chest that I had no name for. 19 years, not once. I thought, so this is what it feels like. I finished my lunch. I went back to work.